Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well. In this video, we're going to take a look at this particular chart and also these categories of different chart patterns and decide which particular pattern is forming here on this chart of Bitcoin and what it potentially means for the crypto. And also in this video, we can talk about the critical level of support on the chart of Bitcoin and why that level is so important. All right, guys, join me. All right, guys, welcome back. Now have a look at this chart of Bitcoin. And I wonder if you can tell me which particular pattern, in fact, let's look at the categories. These are different categories of chart patterns here on, in fact, these are not all the chart patterns, but here are some of the main ones. And see if you can figure out which particular pattern here fits what you're seeing here on the chart of Bitcoin currently as I'm making this video. Now, if you said this is the most likely pattern that's forming here on the chart of Bitcoin, well, I think you'd be absolutely right. In fact, this is likely the pattern that's forming here on the chart of Bitcoin. I'll explain the meaning of this and the significance of this in a few moments. Before I do that though, let me first of all go on this monthly chart of Bitcoin and let me mention what I said back in the month of February in our videos and the strong warning I gave about this particular important support level on the chart of Bitcoin, and also what I said in the members video as well. Let's play these short clips and we'll come back. If we saw a repeat of 2018 and 2014, for example, let's say, for example, Bitcoin instead, let's draw a line across this low here and the 21 monthly EMA. If instead Bitcoin were to break the support, if Bitcoin were to break this support level here at the monthly lows and the 21 monthly EMA here just near 36,000, then a sustained break of that support level could increase risk quite significantly to the downside, like we saw in previous examples. In other words, guys, if this support level were to break, then it could increase the risk of a much more deeper correction and a more extended bear market that could last several more months into this year. If that 43K level does not break this week or in the next couple of weeks quickly, and if instead we see a drop below 37K, then no. That actually could increase risk quite significantly to the downside. A break below 37K, then that actually could increase risk towards the next key levels. I think potentially, very likely the 30K level could get tested, and indeed, yes, I think we potentially could move towards 27K as well. If this is our likely A wave of 4 and a B wave bounce, and the C wave could likely take us down at a very minimum into 30K to 27K, and yes, potentially even if 27K does not hold, we may even see a move down into the lower support region for a potential wave 4 in the green zone. 200 weekly average is at this level. So that means if Bitcoin cannot hold 22K, then we could be seeing a further extension into this range between 21, actually I beg your pardon, that's between 20K or 19,891 to likely 17K, with the optimal support being between 20K to 18,500. All right, guys, welcome back. So as you heard in the February video, so that particular video on the 15th of February, I mentioned a very important support level. So as you may recall, even though I was not right about my higher probability expectation for Bitcoin, nevertheless, we were right to give a very strong warning about a key level of support. And you may remember what that level of support was. It was, as you can see here, the monthly 21 EMA near 36K. And as you can see here, there's a screenshot of my video. I mentioned that if Bitcoin were to see a sustained break off that 21 monthly EMA near 36K, then downside risk likely increases. In fact, I mentioned in that same video that a break of that support, if it happens, could increase risk of a deeper correction and an extended bear market. Okay, so all these warnings were there in that video back in February and also in the members video. In fact, here's the members video back in April. All right, guys, now why am I saying all this? The reason is whenever you're doing trading or chart analysis, you must always be aware and prepare yourself for the worst case scenario. And indeed, you must always prepare yourself, as we know, for risk. And that's why the key levels on the chart, no matter whether we're right or wrong, the key levels of risk are really important. And by the way, in a few moments, I'll mention to you the key levels of risk on this chart of Bitcoin as well. Now, as you can see here on this chart of Bitcoin, I've drawn two parallel lines. And by the way, whenever I do my channels, I always want to find parallel lines. And by the way, you can also do this. You can also go on your chart and choose regression channel or regression trend. And you can draw from the lows to the highs there, okay, the most recent high. And as you can see, it draws for you those parallel lines and this channel for you. And that gives you a 2 standard deviation channel. And that means these levels are going to be very important. I'll mention the key levels for you in a few moments. But let me just first of all go back to this chart here, and I asked you a few moments ago which pattern was likely forming on Bitcoin, as you can see here. And if you said, again, the ascending channel, well, very likely you are correct. Now, this is not an exact representation of what's going on the chart of Bitcoin. It's not precise, but I think it's more or less very similar, or indeed what's happening on the chart of Bitcoin, an ascending channel pattern, as you can see here. And as you can see for yourself on this chart of Bitcoin, it's quite likely we're forming a very similar ascending channel pattern on this chart of BTC. Okay, let's go back to this particular pattern here, the pattern I mentioned to you a few minutes ago. So how do we interpret this particular pattern? Now let me say this, as I'm sure you know, some textbooks, now some chart analysts interpret this particular chart pattern as bullish. They say, well, look, what you have here is a series of higher highs and higher lows. So the highs are getting higher, as you can see here, and the low points are getting higher as well. So you get a series of higher highs, higher lows, and therefore this could be interpreted as a potentially bullish pattern because, again, it's a sign of a potential uptrend within a channel. So that's one way to interpret this particular chart. According to those chart analysts, this pattern could be interpreted as potentially bullish. However, that is not the only way to interpret this particular chart pattern. There is another school of thought. There are some other chartists that actually say, no, this pattern could also be interpreted as bearish as well. Why? Because when these waves, when these particular sections overlap one another, okay, notice these waves and these sections of this channel are overlapping. Because you have a series of overlapping sections, then this is a sign of a corrective pattern, not an impulsive pattern. In other words, this is a sign of a correction rather than an uptrend. In other words, this pattern within this particular school of thought can be said to be bearish as well. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, well, which one is it? Is it bullish or is it bearish? Which kind of interpretation do we go with? Guys, I have bad news for you. You have to be comfortable with both interpretations, both the bullish and the bearish interpretations. And I know some of you hate to hear that, but the fact is you need to be comfortable with uncertainty. There's a fantastic book by a former professional poker player, and her name is Annie Duke. Now, in this book about probabilities, which by the way is a fantastic book, I recommend you get it and read it, Annie Duke says something very important here about probabilities. She says, we're all certainty seekers, and it's because that's the way we're wired. Our brain is wired that way. That being said, the more you can get comfortable with uncertainty, the better off you are. It's a more accurate representation of the world. And she says down here, number one is to stop thinking about things as right and wrong and black and white. So in other words, you need to be comfortable with uncertainty. The fact is, this particular pattern, in fact, all chart patterns, let me say this, all chart patterns, you can interpret them in either way, whether bullish or bearish. And in fact, this pattern can be interpreted in both directions. So as I mentioned before, one way to interpret this is an uptrend or higher highs and higher lows. The second interpretation is a series of overlapping waves and sections, which can be interpreted to be bearish or corrective as well. So let me help you with this, because I'm sure you're probably wondering, okay, is there a way to make it more precise? Is there a way to actually make sense of this? Yes, guys, there is. Have a look at this. Now you'll see here in this example, have a look and pay very close attention to what happens if price were to break out of this pattern to the downside. In fact, that's that arrow is pointing here to break of channel support. So if this channel, in this example, were to break down below support, as you can see here, right there where that arrow is pointing. So if the price were to break out of this channel, usually there tends to be a pullback to the channel breakout point. As you can see, the retest. That's often called kissing the trend line goodbye as well. So if price were to break out of this channel, you want to pay very close attention to what happens next, because usually there tends to be a pullback to that breakout point. And then if price cannot go back inside the channel and then gets rejected, then guess what? That's bad news. That usually means we can actually go lower and likely to retest the lows, the panic lows as well. That's the level you can see here. It says support, key support. So that's actually a bearish pattern. However, look at this. There is also another possibility. Again, remember guys, there is no single way to interpret a chart. Every chart is open to multiple interpretations. Remember, never fall into the trap of thinking there's only one possible interpretation. Because if you think there's only one possible interpretation, that means you don't believe in risk. And if you don't believe in risk, guess what? Be prepared to lose a lot of money. Remember, our brains are wired to want certainty. In fact, our brains will do anything to fight uncertainty. Why? Because it's a survival mechanism within our brains. So bottom line is, guys, if the opposite happens, let's for example say the price were to break out of the channel like you're seeing here, and instead go back within the channel, look at this. Notice in this example, price breaks out of the channel to the downside and then quickly goes back within the channel. If this happens, if a pattern like this happens, then watch out, because this is a very bullish pattern. It's a false break. It's a whipsaw, as you can see here. And by the way, this is a very useful clue. If ever you see something like this, a false break or a whipsaw, something like this, that's a very bullish pattern. It's giving you important clues that likely price could go much higher. So guys, in a nutshell, when you're dealing with a pattern like this, and if price were to break below the channel, you need to be, again, aware and prepare yourself for any possible scenario, whether the bearish scenario, you see the one here, or this particular one, false break, in which case that actually could be a bullish pattern, like the one you're seeing here. So going back to our chart of Bitcoin, well, here's the bottom line. What I would say is this. Right now, as long as Bitcoin can stay within this channel, so as long as Bitcoin can stay above the 21 daily moving average here, and within this channel, in fact, above this channel support level here, for now, bulls have some degree of control here, okay? However, if Bitcoin were to fall below the 21 daily moving average here, and then if it follows through lower and takes out an important support level, the bottom of this channel support, as you see here, just approximately near 21K, or in fact, I would say the key level of support here is approximately 20,715, or let's just say 20,700. So that's going to be a very important level of support here, about 20,700 or 20,715. If price were to break out of this channel, below this channel, and if it were to break below this key level of support, then we need to be very careful, because a sustained break of that support level there could increase downside risk and actually could increase the probability of us retesting the lows we made back in June, if and only if price were to break out of this channel, and if we see a sustained break of 20,700. Again, be aware, guys, of false breaks. As I explained to you a few moments ago, if this happens, however, if price were to break down and then go back within the channel, then no. If a false break happens, then we need to get bullish again on the chart if something like this plays out. All right, guys, so the reason I'm making this video is not just to give you one of these bland, rubbish videos out there. I'm sure you've seen videos on YouTube where people just say, oh, here's a pattern for you. Here's what it means. No, guys, remember, there is no such thing as a single interpretation of any chart pattern. We must always remember risk. And by preparing yourself for risk, you can also limit the potential loss as well, which is what every good chart analyst and trader needs to do. By the way, some of you are probably asking yourself, well, what happens if the price, let's say, were to take out the top of this channel instead of the lower part of the channel? What if price broke above this channel? What does that mean? Well, that's something we'll talk about in a separate video, but for now, just remember where the support levels are, where the key levels of risk are located on the chart, and also where the resistance levels are located as well on this channeling pattern. All right, guys, hope this video helps. Also, guys, let me know in the comment section what you think. Do you think Bitcoin will remain within the pattern, within this chart pattern you're seeing here? Or do you think it'll break out of the pattern? Which one do you think is more likely? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much indeed. Have a fantastic weekend. Bye for now.